We've had experts from so many different fields at this conference over the last 5 years, Diana. We've had journalists, we've had short sellers, we've had people from industry, we've had numerous academics. The one thing we haven't had is an art dealer. And so I am thrilled that I get to have another conversation with Anne, one of the world's greatest art dealers of the last century, maybe ever. But that's probably not why you know her or know about her. We know about her because she sold 23 forged paintings. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some similarities between art fraud and financial fraud. And I just want to say thank you so much for trusting Berkeley and for trusting me with these conversations. They've been fascinating, and I very much appreciate you being willing to do this. And Diana chairs this conference. You all know Diana. We're gonna get her wisdom and drawing some parallels. So this is going to be really fun and unusual, and I think is part of why we love this conference so much, is to be outside the box. And so I want to start off just by asking you about that, but did you have some other way you want to start? Or we talked at lunch about maybe you wanted to start some other way, but I do want to ask you about Glaphyra rosalis, but go ahead and take a moment if you have some other way you'd like to get started.
Thank you, Frank, and I'm privileged to be here with all the experts, which I don't consider myself to be. I've been involved, for sure, in fraud, but no expert to talk about other ways of it. I mentioned to Frank at lunch, I said, can I just take a minute here? So I'm going to try to be very quick. Yesterday, I thought, well, I'm not really preparing anything. We're going to have a conversation. I do trust Frank and my new friend, Diana. We did have one telephone call. But I thought, I'll boost my spirit, this is yesterday, just sort of clearing my head a little bit to what it is that I absolutely do love and have passion for, and that is art. And so I took myself to the Museum of Modern Art. There's a lot of works there to see, but very special is a Henri Matisse exhibition called The Red Studio. The first review I read of the show, of which there are many, was indeed from the Wall Street Journal by Lance Esplund, who's in the front row, and I'd been meaning to see it. So I walked there yesterday afternoon, knowing it would probably be Sunday crowded, but nonetheless, I had read just before going the current New Yorker, which also has another review by Peter Schendahl. And I didn't take notes like both of you, but I wanted to make sure I quoted him correctly. He said, go see the Matisse show. Aesthetic bliss saturates. And I thought, well, that is the way in which I feel about art, the best of it at least. And so I thought, clear my head, separate myself from what's going to happen today. I navigate through the Matisse show, which is more than just great paintings. They actually have an archival section and many wall texts, and I highly recommend anybody goes there who wants to learn about the history of art, not just the art itself. I'm not standing in front of the Red Studio, the masterpiece, but for less than a minute, then a gentleman marches straight over to me. Oh my God, you're Anne Friedman. I saw you in the documentary. Oh my God, tell me about it. Well, that kind of took my, not my breath away, but my attention away from what I was there for. And he was with a woman, a friend, and they really wanted to talk about it and what I went through and how it felt. And I said, we're standing in front of a masterpiece. We're here at the Museum of Modern Art. Why are we not looking at the art? The next thing they said is, we want to take a picture of you in front of the Matisse. Will you do that for me? Of course, I had to trust. I had to trust to give a stranger my cell phone, and then I had to trust his friend, woman, to take my handbag. So I could have been wiped out. Two strangers just in the middle of the room, of the gallery, and they were very nice. But that's the measure here of it's so much about what happens to you, and in this huge ocean of fraudulent difficulties that we're all one way or another experiencing. And I tried, again, and I won't go on, to just give them a sense of what the art is about. And I have a feeling that we're going to talk about the two Ps, which is the fraud we find in people and the fraud we find in paintings. And they can align, but they can also be quite separate, I think.
Okay, so over at MoMA, there are some paintings by Mark Rothko as well. So let's start by having you tell us about your first interaction with Glafira Rosales, who was the source of these 23 forged paintings, and tell us about the first one. So the first one was a Rothko, right? And
Yes.
give us a sense of what happened. Just many people who are here, who are watching, have seen the film, have maybe heard Alec Baldwin on the Art Fraud podcast talk about you, but they haven't heard directly from you. So tell us that first story. Tell us about the Rothko, the first one.
I had an appointment with a woman I did not know, never had met her, Glafira Rosales. The appointment was made by a trusted employee of Nobler Gallery. She came in with one painting, what seemed to be a Mark Rothko. And we spent some time talking about it. I asked her to leave it with me so I could, quote unquote, check it out, show it to a few other people, because it didn't have any provenance. The story was that it had been kind of hidden away with other works of art. Glafira was quite reserved, polite, seemed just credible from the face of it. And she did leave the painting with me, which was some form of trust to leave it, with me I told her I needed to show it to experts, scholars, art historians, since it wasn't known heretofore. And fortunately, there was one of the leading Rothko scholars in town in New York at that point in time, because he otherwise lives in London, by the name of David Anfam. And I mention his name because it's important to know that he directed and did the catalog raisonné on Mark Rothko for our National Gallery in DC. So indeed, he is foremost expert. He came in a day or two later and looked at the Rothko and was completely affirming. In fact, excited that I called the National Gallery because the next catalog raisonné would be on Rothko works on paper, which this was. It's paper mounted, so it reads more like a painting because it's not under glass, but in any case, he was excited. And being the scholar and art historian he is, and he's brilliant, I wanted to tell him as much as I knew, and ongoing as much as I would gather from Glafira Rosales. But that was.
And what was Glafira like? Why did you believe her?
I didn't initially have any particular positive belief, certainly not a negative belief. I just met her, whatever you can gather from meeting somebody for the first time. But there wasn't anything suspicious. Because I had been introduced to her by someone I know very well, and that matters. So showing it to Dr. Anfam and then a few other people, I let her know that I'd be interested in working with it, but I needed to know more. I constantly pressed her. I like to feel politely for whatever she could tell me, but she said that the owner, son of the original owner, wanted absolutely to remain anonymous, private, for many reasons, and that is not extraordinary in the art world. There is a sense of privacy or anonymity, non-disclosure that happens all the time. Any one of you walk into a museum, you will see a label saying private collection, or look in an auction catalog. It is not unusual that you don't know, and that includes a catalog raisonné, private collection. What does that tell you? Nothing. So I was really excited about the work of art because I considered that to be a discovery. And there's very little that excites one more, in my case at least, but I think many dealers would say that. Discovering works of art in an artist's studio, meaning you're coming upon new work, a discovery, or the discovery idea of works that are of artists who are from the past and they hadn't been known, and you as a dealer can help bring them to light and show them to a world of art historians and museum professionals. And that's contributing something to what I would consider to the benefit of the art world.
And just a little bit more flavor for people who haven't seen the film or haven't heard Glafira's voice on the podcast. Just as a person, just tell us what she was like.
Reserved, quiet in a way, friendly, polite, nicely dressed, not too much, not too little, in terms of just her appearance. On the shy side. So there certainly wasn't any sense of hustle or hard sell. And I appreciated that that was different from some people who come in and say, oh, you're going to love this. This is great. She didn't pretend to know a lot about art, knew something, but she referred to the owner as her friend. I eventually referred to him as Mr. X because I never knew his name. Of course, now we know he's fictitious, but for 14 years, I thought he did exist and that he did have a name, just that it wasn't disclosed.
This is perfect. So Diana, I could tell
You can see
you're
I'm
so
bouncing.
revved up and
Yeah,
ready to go.
I'm bouncing.
Does this remind you of anything?
Ms. Rosario was, in effect, Bernie Madoff. I mean, truly, the skill set that she embodied, you could have been describing Bernie Madoff. Reserved, quiet, never pushing, not eager to take your money. Very, very well dressed. I mean, even down to that. But a little mysterious about exactly what's going on here. In a way, the skills of the con artist, and I love that term fits my world and your world,
yes,
con artist. The skill set of the con artist is really like the Swiss Army knife of fraud. I mean, if you've got that capacity to inspire trust and retain trust come hell or high water, you've got it. You've got what she had, you've got what Bernie had, and if you don't have that, you need to go into another line of crime because steal cars or do something else, because if you can't win trust instantly and hold it forever, a con artist is not your line of work. So the parallels between how she presented, both in terms of personality, but also in terms of protocols. Bernie knew the protocols of the world of finance and investment. He knew the lingo. He knew how to flatter people. He knew exactly which buttons to push. Ms. Rosario knew the protocols of the art market. She knew how much it runs on trust. She knew how you thought of people that you dealt with as clients, as relationships that lasted for a long, long time. The degree of trust that would arise within that informal and largely unregulated market where norms were what governed the rules. So you got to know the territory, as they said in The Music Man. You got to know the lingo of the market that you're operating with, and obviously vocabulary is different in the art market than it is in the world of investment management, which was the scene where Bernie made his pitch. But as you know, I mean, there have been, just looking at Ponzi schemes, there have been Ponzi schemes that arose from rare vintages. That was the script. You're going to invest in rare vintage wines. And so that, if you were chatting to the con artist running that Ponzi scheme, it's going to be all about viticulture and all about this slope and this terroir and this vintage, and that's all going to be the props in the script. But it's going to be the same skill set, winning your trust by mirroring back the protocol of that world, and doing so in such a way that disarmed your defenses. I think one of the this is the table I pound on about Bernie Madoff and other Ponzi schemes and con artists like that, is that we have an utterly obsolete image of what con men, con artists look like. We think, as you did, they're going to be twisting your arm. Oh, look at this painting. You got to buy this painting. This is a gem. This is a jewel. You'll never have another chance like this. No, 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 no. That is not how modern cons work. They are low-key. They are laid back. They are relaxed, as was Bernie, as was Ms. Rosario.
It sounds like there are two elements to fraud detection, at least potentially, that are parallel.
Add,
so let me just say what they are, and then I'd like to have you react to them. So it sounds like there's the human side of this, which is personality characteristics, and then there's the substantive side, which is doing analytics on, okay, what's the option strategy, or what is the paint? Is it modern paint, or is it, you know, is this physically like a Rothko? So let's start with the first one. Are there questions that people should have asked Bernie Madoff and Glafira Rosales that are the same questions? When you think back to what you should have asked, what you should have investigated in terms of the human side, are they similar questions? What do you now sitting here say, oh, I really wish I'd done this, or I wish I'd asked her this question? And are those parallels? So maybe we'll hear from you, but I interrupted you, so if there was something else.
No, I just wanted to add to what Diana said, because I don't know the situation with Bernie Madoff, but Glafira she was more or less a puppet or a pawn, albeit certainly behaved like a con artist. But she had a partner, they were not married, by the name of Diaz Bergantinos, and his brother Diaz, or Jesus Bergantinos. In any case, they are still on this earth, but in Spain, and they've never been extradited, though they were indicted and they confessed, but there they are. They were the masterminds. And there was one feeling that I had, that she constantly had to check. It seemingly was with Mr. X, but it was as if there was always a hesitancy, that she said, yes, I hear what you're asking, I'm not sure, I don't know, and then she would get back to me. She did reveal that there was a partner she had in life, not married to, who knew about these works, but it did complicate it slightly.
Do you think, in response to Frank's question, that would have been a thread that you could have pulled, or were there other threads that in hindsight you wished you had paid more attention to or seen? I mean, in hindsight, we're all geniuses, right? But
no, I do. In real time, I wish that I had come to know her in detail.
Yes.
And I say it that way because I don't really take bios on people. There are lots of, all the time, I'm meeting new people who have collections whom I hadn't known before. Maybe we know someone in common, but I'm always meeting new people who say, listen, I'm interested in art, maybe selling, maybe buying. And I don't ask about their wife. I sometimes come to learn that they have a family and there's a little background, but I don't probe that way. And I say that, I'm very aware of it because I actually, I know many people who always find out a lot about people before they get to, do anything with them. It's just not quite my way. I learn as I go. But yes, I wish I would have had the more of a determination to know her better. We would have lunch once in a while, never visited her home. Her daughter did intern at Knoedler one summer in the library, but she was lovely, but I had very little to do with, interacting with her. So I believed Glafira Rosales. I'll use the word believe, whereas I trusted the art.
Right.
And however any of us want to define the difference between the belief and the trust.
I think we need to remind ourselves, as scientists would, that as human beings, we are hardwired to trust each other. We're built that way. That's our default position. We meet someone, especially if they look and sound a lot like us, or they have the expertise that we respect and admire, whether it's in art or whether it's in finance, we are inclined to trust them, barring other circumstances. And so unless we build into how we do our due diligence an awareness that we've got that flaw. I mean, in finance, it's easy. I tell people, look, don't do business with friends and family because you trust them and you want to be able to trust them. And if you trust them, you will be blind to all the red flags that you need to be able to see when you're doing business with people. Now, there are other worlds, and art is obviously one of them, where friendships emerge, relationships emerge around the art, and so powerfully around the art, that admonition is very, very hard to obey, and to observe, which makes it even more makes the participants in that market, I think, even more vulnerable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'd like to ask you, Diana, because I did, and I'm not saying it as trying to explain, but reality, the actual truth is that I did an enormous amount of due diligence with a lot of help. It takes a village with art experts and scholars and archivists to relate and almost form a community around these works of art. Because I got a second one and then a third one. So it was so focused on the works of art and their history and families of those artists that in some way I probably just let go of the focus I wish I had had on the person who brought me the paintings.
Yeah, it's purely understandable. This idea of how you protect yourself from your tendency to trust is harder in some markets than in others. And let's be fair. I meet people all the time who come up to me and say, lots of people like you who say, I never would have believed Bernie Madoff. I just seen him coming a mile away, never would have given him my money. And I just roll my eyes. I say, sure, right, yeah. You know, look at the people he gulled. Look at the people he ripped off. These were not the stupid people of the world. That gift, that ability to deceive is genuinely a talent, and we're not always alert for it in every realm of our life. What's intriguing to me as an amateur student of fraudsters and con artists is how a different environment prompts the same skill set to emerge in a different way. That you know, what is it about the way the art market, well, for want of a better word, regulates itself? Yeah. What is it about the way the art market operates that makes it harder or easier to do the kind of due diligence, skeptical, hard-headed due diligence that could help protect people from the kind of fraud that you were victimized by?
Yeah, so let's explore that one for a little bit as well. Sounds like one of the takeaways here is that there are similarities, at least in terms of the human side of our perception of these individuals in both contexts. But there are, you've alluded to this a couple times now, there are some clear differences. If we think just big picture, legal academics sometimes look at regulatory structures as being either a focus on specifying rules in advance, ex ante specification of here's what you can do, here's what you can't do, versus broader standards, principles enforced after the fact, as in common law. And we have a range of regulation. We can have we've heard from the SEC and the Department of Justice. We'd like to have regulators here every year as part of our discussion, but we've also talked a little bit about informal norms in private markets. The art market is regulated in some ways, but not much, right? You have contractual arrangements.
It's not regulated.
Yeah, so we have contracts, right, that you enter into, right? This new Sotheby's example is where there's a contract, right? And France has different rules than the United States, for example. But in the most part, we're talking about a norms-based system, private system. versus a public enforcement system. So let's just explore. We have another 5 minutes. Let's talk about those differences, because people here deal in both areas, right? We deal in highly regulated markets, but also private ones. So
just a quick historical, and this arises from work I'm doing on the birth of the SEC. Prior to the regulatory scheme put in place with the New Deal in 1933 and 34, the stock market was like the art market. It was a gentleman's code that governed it. Everybody knew everybody else. You did business on a handshake, and maybe you wouldn't embarrass your friend by reporting that he hadn't quite done it quite according to Hoyle. So it was a world of informal norms. Yes, there were rules at the New York Stock Exchange, but the people who ruled the stock exchange were more powerful than the rules of the stock exchange, and if they decided to look the other way, they did as they did. So that's what the stock market used to look like, an informal, norms-based, handshake code understanding. So it's not like it's either or, it's like a continuum. I don't know if there's any way the art market could move more in that direction.
But one of the things, and I don't claim to understand so much, how you analyze an investment, which is, let me just say, money. Because that's quantifiable. We could take a hunk of gold and we could figure out, putting it through a machine of the forensics, is it real gold or is it not?
True.
And we can do that with a lot of things, a lot of material things. Art may be the one that you've got to interpret. And in all of that interpretation, and I will quote one of the most famous museum directors and professionals that we've known in generations, who was the director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Thomas Hoving. He was rather famous because he did a lot for the Met to open it up to the public and programming and so forth that was so popular. And he was interviewed often because he wanted to be out there. He didn't want the museum to just be elitist. And so he really spoke to an audience. And he was asked, well, with all of the troubles in the art world, antiquities and smuggling works in and what the policies are, the Met, so how many works in the museum do you think you have on your walls that might not be right, that might actually be forgeries? And he looked straight into the audience and said, I have no idea. And that will tell you that there isn't a museum that exists where they know for sure that every work of art they have in their permanent collection, I'm not talking about exhibitions now because we've just heard some news about that, but in their permanent collections, are they going to do forensic testing on their entire collection? I doubt that. It's very expensive, by the way, besides all the effort it takes. But there have been, now, the difference between a forgery and a fake. A fake is a duplicate copy, another one exists. It's a, exact look-alike, whereas a forgery is in the spirit, the character of what that artist could have painted. And that's what can fool you, that it's so convincing to look like the hand of, because
and when people hear, sorry to interrupt, but when people hear you talk about forgeries, I think many people in the room will think probabilistically. And the quote that you just gave us sort of has implicit in it thinking about the probability of a painting being a forgery. But when I've asked you about whether you think this way, the first time I asked you, you looked at me like I was from another planet, asking what's the probability that this is a forgery. The second time you looked at me like I was from another planet. In the art world, people just don't think that way. Is that right?
Oh, I think that a lot of people will, if a work of art looks not quite right, they're immediately suspicious. It's not that everything looks good. I have to say it because I felt it then, and it hasn't actually left me, that these are brilliant forgeries. And with all of the press, and my God, there's been a lot of press. Yes. And then add in, yes, films and documentaries and television shows, 60 Minutes, you name it. Everything of negativity and a lot of accusations and a lot of, forgive the word, damning. But they didn't talk about the paintings being what we'll call laughers. Oh, how could you have believed that's a Rothko or a Pollock or a de
People
Kooning?
still love them.
They
People
were
still love them.
convincing the forger who's in China, in Shanghai, Pei Shen, is a brilliant artist.
And they have value now, right? These are valuable. You have 3 of them, right? You have 2 in your possession.
People are asking me would I, for a price, sell my.
You have some
forger.
buyers here, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that's one of the big differences between the art world and Bernie Madoff. Nobody wants Bernie Madoff's investments today.
There you go.
Well,
There you go.
so we're out of time, but I do want to make it clear that you have the pub date for your book is in the fall of.
Oh,
or
yes,
end of
next fall,
year.
yes,
Yeah.
you'll be hearing
And
about it at Fraudfest next year, I hope. All
So
goes
yeah, so
well.
just give it. Let's end by. So it does sound like there are some parallels, and there's this important point about informal regulation, as in the art world, and formal regulation. So just maybe
Yes,
take us
and
home
the
by
big,
giving us
and since we're short on time, and I'll mention it a little bit in my closing remarks, I think one of the real parallels for us today is to reflect back on that, that self-regulatory myth of the 1920s and how we learned that it doesn't hold water and why it still doesn't hold water. So the lessons for me have been, we're still learning why we need to still regulate Wall Street. I mean, it isn't a lesson learned, it's a lesson being learned every day. So I hope that I'll be able to tell you more about this one next year when it will be on the brink of publication with luck. This has been the pandemic book. The archives closed, no one could travel, star-crossed a little bit, but stay tuned.
We're excited about it, and I won't clap for myself, but join me in clapping for these 2.
Thank you.